Red Hollow, Montana, a place where winter bites hard and the night air stings with secrets. The storm arrived sudden, swallowing the town in white fury. Wind howled through the lonely streets, lashing abandoned swings and rattling window panes. All across Main Street, lights flickered and died, one by one, until only the faint blue of police cruiser strobes cast any hope into the darkness. Deputy Emily Parker sat alone in her car, radio crackling with half-heard warnings from dispatch. She'd been here before, alone in the night, hunting shadows, always feeling like something watched her from just out of sight. But this storm, it felt personal. She wiped frost from the windshield and checked her phone. No new messages. Not from her father. Not from anyone. The ache in her chest had become familiar, a wound that wouldn't close since her brother died. She tried to forget. She tried to serve. But tonight her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then, over the screech of the storm, she saw movement, a shape limping through swirling snow, head low, body gaunt. At first, Emily thought it was a coyote, but as her headlights swept closer, she realized it was a dog, a German shepherd, battered and wild-eyed, the kind she'd only seen on old police force posters. His fur was matted with ice, one ear torn, a limp in his hind leg. He paused in the middle of the road, turning to stare at her as if he recognized something deep in her soul. Emily stepped out, boots crunching. "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" she called, voice trembling. The dog, Ranger, hesitated, hackles bristling, but didn't flee. Emily knelt, hands out. For a moment, the two stared at each other, alone in the swirling blizzard. Then, with a flash of memory, Emily remembered her own lost dog years ago, a moment so raw she almost sobbed. Ranger slunk away, vanishing between the alleyways. Suddenly, the radio squawked. "Deputy Parker, suspicious activity near the old railway warehouse. Possible break-in. Proceed with caution." Emily's heart hammered. She slid back into her cruiser, following the route that wound past shuttered diners and frozen playgrounds. The storm thickened, blinding her until she was running on instinct alone. She parked near the crumbling warehouse, flashlight beams slicing through swirling flakes. Footprints, fresh and deep, led inside. She moved quickly, mind racing, but the silence inside the warehouse pressed down on her, heavy as the snow on the roof. She barely registered the shadow behind her before it struck. A sharp blow to her head, arms wrapped around her, rough and desperate. Emily fought, but it was no use. She tasted blood in her mouth as they dragged her down rotting stairs, binding her wrists with frayed rope. She tried to scream, but a dirty rag muffled her voice. The world tilted. She landed hard on a concrete floor, cold seeping into her bones. Her captor, a hulking figure in a ski mask, knelt beside her. "No one's coming," he hissed, breath sour with whiskey. "No one ever does." He turned and left, footsteps echoing above. The door slammed shut. Emily was alone, shivering, fighting panic as darkness closed in. She pulled against the ropes until her wrists bled, but nothing gave. She tried to remember her training, how to slow her breathing, how not to lose hope. But the cold pressed closer, whispering that she wouldn't make it through the night. Meanwhile, outside in the blizzard, Ranger roamed the streets, nose to the ground, haunted by ghosts. He caught a scent, a faint memory of warmth and trust, of a woman's voice calling "good boy" years ago. It tugged at something inside him, something lost. He padded through alleyways, driven by an instinct he didn't understand, until he found himself at the broken warehouse door. From deep inside, he heard muffled cries, a human voice, raw with fear. Ranger whined, scratching at the door, desperate to reach whoever was inside. He threw his weight against the boards, teeth gnashing wood, claws scraping in vain. But the door wouldn't budge. Inside, Emily's breath frosted in the air. She heard something, a scraping, a scratching, the whimper of a dog outside. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. Maybe, somewhere in the storm, something still cared whether she lived or died. The minutes stretched. Ranger circled the building, searching for another way in. He braved broken glass, old cans, shards of metal, but every entry was blocked. Still, he refused to leave. In the snow, he lay down outside the door, body curled tight, refusing to give up. Inside, Emily fought for consciousness, clutching that thin thread of hope, the sense that someone, even just a battered stray, was out there with her in the darkness. And so the storm raged on, blurring the boundaries between human and animal, hope and despair, life and death. Two souls, both battered and lost, each holding on for the other, unaware that fate had already begun to draw them together. Outside the old warehouse, the blizzard battered Red Hollow with an anger that felt almost personal. Hours blurred together as snow piled up around battered sheds and twisted barbed wire, erasing any trace of life. But Ranger, the battered German shepherd, didn't move from his post at the door. The storm might have howled, but inside him something howled even louder. A need he didn't fully remember, a promise his bones couldn't forget. Night after night, Ranger circled the warehouse. The scent, faint, familiar, desperate, clung to his mind, triggering flashes of memory that twisted through the cold. A hand on his collar, a soft voice, the sharp bark of a command. But those memories brought pain. The face he wanted to see was gone. Instead, all he could do was pace through the snow, haunted by shadows. Inside, Deputy Emily Parker felt the numbness crawl deeper under her skin. Time unraveled. Sometimes she drifted through half-remembered dreams, her brother's face hovering just out of reach. Sometimes she jolted awake to the biting ache in her wrists, and the empty dark pressing close. The storm outside was relentless, but the storm inside her, old wounds, guilt, the sense that she'd failed too many, was worse. Her lips cracked as she tried to whisper a prayer, but her voice wouldn't come. She remembered the night her brother died, how she'd promised her family she'd look after him, how she hadn't been fast enough. Her badge, the symbol of her duty, now lay lost somewhere in the snow outside. The old warehouse creaked and moaned as if mourning with her. Above she heard footsteps, phantom or real, she couldn't tell. Each time the sound faded, she wondered if she'd see daylight again. Outside, Ranger's search became frantic. His body shook with exhaustion, but the scent of Emily, so close, so much like the woman he once loved, called him back, again and again. On the third night, he limped along the edge of the property, nose low, when his paw brushed something cold and metallic half buried in the drift. He nudged it, then pulled it free, a police badge smeared with blood and grit. He stared at it, ears flattening. In a rush, images slammed into his mind, the old handler's uniform, the badge she wore, the pride in her voice. For a moment he forgot the cold, the pain in his leg. His instincts roared to life. He gripped the badge in his teeth and returned to the warehouse, determination burning in his eyes. Inside, Emily shivered violently, her mind a patchwork of memory and delirium. She saw her brother as a boy, chasing fireflies by the creek, her mother crying behind a closed bedroom door, her own hands, small and shaking, clutching a badge and a promise. She wondered if she'd ever get the chance to make it right. Suddenly, through the fog of despair, she heard something new, a scratching at the door, urgent and steady. She blinked, listening. It didn't sound human. Her heart leaped, a primal hope surging. Ranger pressed against the door, dropping the badge with a metallic clatter. He barked once, sharp and low, the way he'd been taught. The sound echoed in the darkness. Inside, Emily tried to call out, but her voice was a croak. "Hey!" she rasped, panic and hope warring inside her. "Here, please!" Ranger's ears pricked. He circled to a crack at the base of the door and whined, his nose working, scenting her fear and blood. Frustrated, he pawed at the wood, gnawed at a loose board, teeth scraping, claws gouging splinters. Emily struggled to sit upright, wrists aching against the ropes. Her thoughts whirled. Could it really be a dog? Or was she imagining things, mind breaking from the cold? She forced herself to focus on the sounds, the steady persistence outside. Then, with a sudden surge of energy, Ranger managed to break a rotted plank just enough to poke his muzzle through. His teeth closed around something soft, her blindfold. He tugged, careful but insistent. At first, Emily jerked back, startled, then realized what was happening. The cloth slipped off her eyes, letting her blink into the darkness, disoriented, but suddenly not so alone. For the first time since she'd been taken, Emily's world shifted. She could see faint moonlight through a cracked window, shadows flickering as Ranger's silhouette filled the gap at the door. Their eyes met. One human, one canine, both filled with exhaustion and the faintest spark of hope. Emily felt her breath shudder out, relief and gratitude warring with disbelief. She didn't know who this dog was, where he came from, or why he wouldn't leave her behind. But she saw something in his gaze, steadfast, stubborn, alive. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "You found me." Ranger wagged his tail, the movement tentative, as if he half remembered what it meant to be praised. He nudged her hand, licking her frozen fingers with a gentleness that nearly broke her heart. Outside, the storm still raged, but something had changed. Inside, the smallest spark of hope was rekindled. Emily wasn't free yet. Ranger wasn't whole. But in that warehouse, in the heart of the storm, they had each other. A battered badge, a wounded soul, and the beginnings of a bond neither had expected. And so, as the blizzard howled on, Ranger curled himself against the broken door, refusing to leave. Emily, blindfold gone, stared into the darkness with new resolve. She would hold on, for herself, for the dog who refused to give up, for the brother she still carried inside. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she believed survival might be possible. A single shaft of moonlight crept through the grime-smeared window, laying a thin line of silver across the basement floor. Emily stared at it, blinking through exhaustion, watching as the dust motes spun in the cold air. Her wrists throbbed, raw and swollen where the ropes had cut skin. She barely felt it now. A deeper numbness pressed in, settling into her bones. But she refused to let go. Not now, not when she could see, even dimly, and sense life in the shadows. Somewhere nearby, Ranger shifted his weight. The German shepherd, though battered and limping, prowled the perimeter of the cramped room. Every few minutes he circled back, sniffed at Emily's feet, then retreated, head low, ears twitching at each sound above. Emily's thoughts tangled and blurred, past bleeding into present. Cold sweat dripped down her spine as she tried to focus. Instead, old memories crashed over her, her brother Gabe as a little boy, begging her not to leave him alone in the dark. That promise, broken the night she failed him. His voice came back to her now, shaky, filled with fear, and then silence. She bit down hard, willing herself not to cry. If she started, she wasn't sure she'd stop. She tried to reach Ranger. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, the sound almost lost in the cavernous dark. "You still there?" A pause. Ranger's paws scraped softly over cement. Then, slowly, he crept forward, breath steaming from his snout. He watched her, eyes wary but searching, his whole body taut with old memories. For a moment, neither moved. Two wounded creatures, both haunted by ghosts, circling each other on the edge of collapse. Emily pressed her cheek to the floor, letting her tears run silent and hidden. She listened to Ranger's breath, the steady rhythm grounding her. Above, footsteps sounded, maybe the captor, maybe just the wind shifting debris. Every sound was threat, but also a reminder that she was alive. The silence pressed in. Emily's mind drifted, battered by the cold. She remembered her brother's laughter, a flash of sunlight on a lake, her father's voice after the funeral, broken, apologetic, promising things would get better. They never did. Emily found herself whispering apologies to the dark, to Gabe, to her mother, to everyone she'd let down. She flinched as something touched her hand. Soft, warm, a rough tongue, then the gentle weight of a dog's muzzle pressing close. Ranger. She felt his breath, smelled the faint musk of his coat, the tang of blood and fear. Slowly, he licked her knuckles, his movements tentative, almost reverent. Emily swallowed hard, fighting the urge to sob. The dog didn't judge her. He didn't know her failures, only her pain. For the first time since she'd been taken, she let herself hope, not for rescue, not for revenge, but for simple connection. Something real, something alive. She didn't speak but closed her eyes, letting Ranger's presence fill the dark. His warmth seeped into her chilled skin, a promise that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond saving. Ranger trembled, caught in his own battle. The warehouse air brought him sharp, jagged memories, a siren wailing, flames licking up walls, a woman's scream swallowed by smoke. He flinched at the memory, a whimper trapped in his throat. The last time he'd trusted a human, he'd failed to save her. The guilt pressed heavy, a chain he couldn't break. But now, with Emily's hand beneath his muzzle, something stirred in him, a need to try again, to fight for this broken human as if she were the one he'd lost. He nudged her hand, then moved to her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. Emily felt it, a slow, building trust. She shifted closer, letting her shoulder rest against his fur. The chill faded, just a fraction. She remembered training with the K9 units years ago, how she'd envied the bond between handler and dog. Back then, she'd kept her distance, afraid to love anything she couldn't save. Now, with nothing left to lose, she leaned in. Time slipped by in fits and starts. Emily drifted, sometimes conscious, sometimes lost in half-dreams. Her brother's face, Ranger's old handler calling for help, fire and smoke, sirens fading into the night. But always she woke to Ranger's steady breathing, a heartbeat in the darkness. Footsteps above made them both flinch. Emily's fear spiked. Her captor was close, maybe listening, maybe deciding. She held her breath, eyes locked with Ranger's. For a moment, everything hinged on silence. But then the footsteps faded, replaced by the settling groans of the storm-tossed building. Emily whispered, "We're not alone, are we?" She wasn't sure if she meant the captor, her brother's ghost, or Ranger himself. Maybe all three. Ranger pressed closer, his head now resting on her lap. He whimpered once, the sound barely more than a sigh, but it held worlds of meaning, fear, exhaustion, and the faintest hope. Outside, the blizzard still raged, wind shrieking through broken rafters, but inside something shifted. Emily, exhausted, drifted toward sleep, Ranger guarding her with the fierce, wounded loyalty of the forgotten. Somewhere in the dark, hope flickered, just enough to keep them both alive for one more hour, one more night. The storm battered Red Hollow through the night, hammering the old warehouse so fiercely that the walls rattled with each fresh gust. Emily huddled against the icy floor, her back pressed to the crumbling foundation, feeling the cold as a living thing working its way into her bones. Yet beside her, Ranger stood sentinel, his ragged breath fogging the air, his presence a defiant barrier against despair. She shifted, biting back a cry, as her wrists throbbed against the ropes. Her limbs were weak, numbness crawling up her fingers. She risked a glance at Ranger, meeting his eyes, wild, haunted, but lit with a flicker of something she hadn't seen before. Determination. Or was it pain? The German shepherd moved closer, the heavy sighs of the blizzard nearly drowning out the soft scrape of his claws on the concrete. "Hey, easy," Emily whispered, coaxing calm into her voice as if soothing a skittish child. "You're all right. I'm here." She forced a smile, though her lips trembled. "We'll get out, you and me. Promise." Ranger paused, uncertain. In his eyes, she saw fear, a deeper, older wound than anything the storm had inflicted. She knew that look, haunted, almost ashamed. It was the same look she'd seen in her own mirror every morning since her brother's funeral. She'd learned how to hide her pain behind a badge, but there was no hiding from the kind of sorrow this dog carried. He circled, nose twitching. Emily noticed the way his body tensed, the half-step backward, as if he expected something awful to happen at any moment. He pressed his snout to her ropes, sniffing, then began gnawing gently at the fibers. She flinched as his teeth brushed her skin but stayed still, letting him work. In the quiet, her mind wandered. She remembered a different storm years ago, lightning splitting the sky, her mother sobbing in the next room and herself, a child alone under the bed, clutching her brother's hand. She whispered encouragement now, as if whispering to that same frightened child. "Good boy," she told Ranger, voice low. "That's it. You're doing great." A tremor ran through Ranger. He gnawed harder, paws planted firm, muscles straining with effort. Each tug on the rope sent pain shooting through Emily's arms, but she gritted her teeth, urging him on. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just a little more." Ranger stopped abruptly, panting, his eyes flicking to hers. In the gloom, Emily saw the flash of memory cross his face. Fire, screaming, flames leaping up, a woman's voice crying out for help. For a moment he froze, trembling violently. Emily recognized the look, the flash of terror that came with reliving a nightmare. "It's all right," she murmured, pushing through her own pain to reach him. "You're safe. I'm here. We're together." Something in her voice broke through his panic. Ranger shuddered, then resumed chewing, tearing at the rope with renewed determination. The fibers frayed, one by one. Emily forced herself to breathe, the rhythm steady, fighting the cold and the panic and the old grief swirling in her chest. As Ranger worked, images flickered behind his eyes, his handler, Officer Jessica Grady, calling him from the flames, her voice lost in the roar of the inferno. He remembered the moment he failed to reach her, the helpless terror as he was dragged away from the burning house. The pain of loss never left him. It clung to every step, every dream, every new face he met. Yet here, in the basement with Emily, something shifted. The ropes gave way beneath his teeth, and Emily's hands finally slipped free. She gasped, cradling her raw wrists, and met Ranger's gaze, a look of shared pain and shared triumph. "Thank you," she breathed, emotion catching in her throat. She stroked his muzzle, careful and gentle. "You saved me, Ranger. You really did." He licked her palm, cautious, as if testing the truth of her gratitude. The gesture broke something open inside her, something she'd kept locked away for years. For the first time since her brother died, she let herself hope, just a little. Outside, the wind shrieked and ice hammered the windows, but inside, a fragile warmth bloomed between woman and dog. Emily rose, unsteady, blood rushing back into her hands with agonizing pins and needles. Ranger pressed to her side, his body a shield, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. She searched the basement, eyes scanning for anything to use as a weapon or tool. Old boxes, broken bottles, an iron pipe, rusted but heavy. As she moved, Ranger's past surfaced in her mind, scenes she could only imagine, the fire, the chaos, the handler who'd loved him and the loss that hollowed him out. Emily reached for him, fingers threading through his matted fur. "You lost someone too, didn't you?" she whispered, voice breaking. "You know what it's like." The German shepherd whined, pressing his head into her hand. Together, they waited. Emily gathered her strength, Ranger curled tight against her, eyes fixed on the door. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, rage, sorrow, memories that threatened to drown them both. But for the first time, they faced it together. Outside, dawn was only a pale idea, a hint of silver behind the bruised sky. Snow still hurled itself against Red Hollow, relentless, the storm refusing to loosen its grip. The whole world seemed frozen, waiting, the silence of morning broken only by the hollow whistle of wind through empty alleys. But at the edge of town, hope flickered into life. Lisa Bennett hadn't slept. The young veterinarian watched the storm through the fogged glass of her kitchen, waiting for it to break, her mind looping through old fears. Sometimes she saw her brother's face in the storm, lost and unreachable. She'd searched for him when she was a child, flashlight in hand, promising herself she'd find every lost soul who crossed her path. The habit stuck, so when the battered German shepherd appeared at her back door, dragging something clamped between his jaws, Lisa didn't hesitate. She moved toward him, careful, quiet, not wanting to startle a creature who looked like he'd survived more than just the cold. "Hey there," Lisa murmured, crouching low. "It's okay. I'm here to help." Ranger stood still, his body trembling, eyes flicking between Lisa's face and the kitchen light behind her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low whine, he limped forward and dropped his burden at her feet. Emily's blood-stained badge, half buried in crusted snow. Lisa's breath caught. She recognized the name, the number etched into the metal, the dark stains that turned her gut to ice. She pressed her hand to Ranger's head, feeling the heat beneath the matted fur, the rapid flutter of his pulse. "Good boy," she whispered, trying not to cry. "Show me." Without waiting, Lisa grabbed her phone, dialing the sheriff's station with shaking hands. Sheriff Tom Briggs answered on the third ring, rough-voiced, half awake. Lisa didn't bother with pleasantries. "Sheriff, it's Lisa Bennett. I think I found Emily Parker's badge. There's a dog, a German shepherd. He brought it to me. Something's wrong." "She's in trouble." The words tumbled out, urgent, desperate. Briggs barked a command to hold tight, said he'd send Sergeant Claire Durham and a search team. Within minutes, Lisa was pulling on boots, stuffing blankets and dog treats into her backpack. She didn't care that the wind threatened to rip the door off its hinges. She didn't care about the way her fingers numbed instantly, or how the snow stung her cheeks raw. She just followed Ranger, who took off with a sudden burst of purpose, head down, back into the heart of the storm. Back at the warehouse, Emily pressed herself against the frozen wall, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Her wrists ached where the ropes had left their mark, but she was free, alive, barely, but not beaten. Ranger had helped her, and now, as she listened to the groan of floorboards above, she felt hope. Thin, trembling, but undeniable. She whispered a promise. "I won't go down easy. Not again. Not while he's counting on me." Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Emily's body tensed, every nerve on fire. She motioned for Ranger to hide, heart pounding in her throat. A figure descended into the darkness. Ray Morton. She could see him clearly now, mid-30s, hair greasy, eyes wild with something brittle and broken. He muttered to himself, knife glinting as he turned it over in his hands. "You're awake," he sneered, voice slurred. "Did you think someone was coming? Nobody cares, Parker. Nobody ever did." Emily stared him down, refusing to look away. She searched for any weakness, any hint of doubt in his eyes. But Ray was a man unmoored, untethered from reality, dangerous not just because he wanted power, but because he was desperate. "I've got friends," he taunted, pacing. "You're just the start, you know that. There are others. This town's got secrets, you'll see." He spat on the floor, eyes flicking to Ranger's shadow in the corner. Emily braced herself, but Ray only laughed, oblivious to the real threat. Meanwhile, outside, Lisa fought her way through drifts up to her knees, clutching the badge like a talisman. She met up with Sheriff Briggs and Sergeant Durham near the edge of the storm. Lisa's teeth chattered, but her resolve burned bright. "She's close," she insisted. "That dog, he knows. We have to follow him." Briggs and Durham exchanged a look, torn between skepticism and hope. Then, as Ranger's tracks became visible, they agreed. With the blizzard swirling, they pressed on, calling for backup, forming a line as they combed the outskirts. Back in the warehouse, Ray grew more agitated. Emily could see the panic flickering behind his bluster. He stalked to the window, watching the swirling white beyond. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" he hissed. "Not if I get out first." He turned, knife flashing. "Don't move," he warned. "You stay put." Ray stormed upstairs, footsteps pounding overhead. Emily breathed in shallow gulps, adrenaline making her dizzy. She turned to Ranger, meeting his eyes. "We don't have long," she whispered. "You saved me once. Can you do it again?" Ranger seemed to understand. He whined, pawing at the door, then, without waiting, bolted out through a hole in the wall, vanishing into the snow, every instinct screaming that time was running out. Above, Ray's silhouette passed by the window, clutching a duffel bag. Emily's thoughts raced. She listened for the sirens, for boots crunching in the snow, but all she heard was the wild beat of her own heart, and distantly, Ranger's desperate howl calling help through the storm. Inside the warehouse, the cold settled deeper, each second crawling by as Emily pressed herself into the corner, clutching the iron pipe she'd pried loose in trembling hands. Her mind raced, calculating escape routes, cataloging every sound. Wind rattling broken panes, the groan of settling beams, and above all, the rhythmic, frantic thumping of Ray Morton's boots overhead. The world outside was all blizzard and hope. Inside, only fear and the taste of blood in her mouth. Emily held her breath. Her hands shook, not from weakness but from the surge of adrenaline she'd been holding at bay. She could hear Ray pacing in the room above, talking to himself, his voice alternating between venomous mutters and nervous laughter. She picked out snippets. "They're watching. Can't trust anyone. She'll ruin everything." Words that chilled her in ways the cold never could. Suddenly, the trapdoor slammed open. A rectangle of dirty light spilled into the basement as Ray lumbered down the steps, knife glinting in his fist. His eyes shone with a feverish intensity. He moved in fits and starts as if listening to voices only he could hear. "You think you're better than me?" he sneered, his gaze darting around the room. "You think you can judge me? You don't know what it's like, deputy. You don't know what they make you do when nobody's watching." Emily forced herself to stay silent, watching him, analyzing every move. Her mind spun through options. The iron pipe felt heavy, awkward. One chance maybe, if she could catch him off guard. But Ray was a man on the edge, and one mistake could end everything. Ray stopped just out of reach, waving the knife. "They said I had to disappear you. Make an example, you know. Show people you can't poke around where you don't belong." He lunged closer, waving the blade. Emily tensed, her grip tightening. Ray's hand shook, but his anger burned hotter than his fear. But then, before Emily could act, a low, furious growl rose from the shadows at the far end of the basement. Both human and captor turned. "Ranger." The German shepherd stalked from the dark, hackles raised, teeth bared, every muscle rigid with purpose. Gone was the hesitant stray. Now Ranger was every inch the trained protector, his haunted eyes clear and fixed. Ray hesitated, caught off guard. "You again?" he spat, laughing nervously. "What's one mutt going to—" Before he could finish, Ranger launched at him with a sudden savage force. Ray stumbled backward, slashing wildly. Ranger darted in, jaws snapping, forcing Ray to drop the knife as he tried to defend himself. The two figures tangled in a whirlwind of snarls, curses, and flying limbs. Emily seized the moment. She surged to her feet, swinging the pipe with every ounce of strength left in her battered body. The iron cracked against Ray's wrist, sending the knife skittering across the cement. Ray howled, clutching his arm as Ranger clamped down on his jacket sleeve, dragging him away from Emily. Ray twisted free, his eyes wild with panic now. He staggered back, bleeding from his forearm, kicking wildly at Ranger as he scrambled for the stairs. Emily stood between Ray and the dropped knife, heart racing, pipe raised defensively. Ray froze, realizing escape was his only option. He spat at Emily's feet. "You're dead anyway, you hear me? Dead!" With that, he bolted up the steps, nearly tripping over his own panic. Ranger lunged after him but stopped at the stairs, eyes locked on Emily, awaiting her command. For a split second, she saw a flash of the old training, the canine instincts just beneath the battered fur. "Stay!" she rasped, holding Ranger's gaze. The German Shepherd dropped into a tense crouch, blocking the exit, watching as Ray vanished through the trapdoor. A second later, the acrid smell of smoke curled into the basement. Emily's eyes widened. Above, Ray's footsteps echoed frantically, then the unmistakable whoosh of accelerant catching fire. Flames licked the edges of the trapdoor, smoke pouring down in thick, choking waves. Emily coughed, dropping to one knee. Ranger darted to her side, nudging her, barking twice, sharp, urgent, the command for move echoing through his voice. "We've got to get out," Emily gasped, mind racing. The smoke burned her throat, turning every breath to agony. She crawled toward the wall, feeling along for the vent she'd noticed earlier. "Come on, Ranger, this way." As she worked at the rusted grate, Ranger stood guard, eyes on the trapdoor, growling at every creak above. Smoke thickened, the world shrinking to a swirl of pain, firelight, and fear. Emily yanked at the vent, using the last of her strength to wrench it free. Cold air rushed in, mixing with the toxic haze. "Go!" she choked out, shoving Ranger toward the opening. The dog hesitated, looking back at her, refusing to leave. Emily shoved again, coughing hard. "Ranger, move!" At last, Ranger crawled through, paws scrambling against icy earth. Emily followed, every muscle screaming. Behind them, the basement filled with smoke and fire, the last shreds of rope and hope burning away. They emerged in the shadow of the warehouse, flames roaring behind them. Emily collapsed into the snow, Ranger pressed tight against her. Overhead, sirens wailed through the storm, the rescue team, finally closing in. Ray's white van tore away from the warehouse, engines screaming, tires skidding on ice. Sergeant Claire Durham caught sight of him and gave chase, shouting for backup. But Ranger didn't move. He stood over Emily, battered and coughing, refusing to leave her side. In the distance, the warehouse burned, a beacon of destruction, but also, somehow, the start of something new. Smoke poured into the sky, orange and ugly against the swirling storm. The flames devoured the warehouse with a fury, lighting up the blizzard, sending embers spinning through the air like frantic fireflies. Emily hit the snow outside, hacking and wheezing, the taste of ash in her mouth. The cold was savage against her burned throat and raw wrists, but it felt like mercy, proof she was alive, that somehow she and Ranger had clawed their way free. Beside her, Ranger stood tall, chest heaving, battered but vigilant. His fur was scorched in places, but his eyes, brighter now than ever, scanned the darkness for new threats. He nudged Emily with his nose, whined softly, and pressed his body to her side, anchoring her to the world. Emily looked up. The snowstorm raged on, but through the shifting white she saw movement, headlights, the dull blue pulse of emergency lights, shapes emerging from the blizzard, voices carried on the wind, sharp and urgent, her name, called over and over. She tried to shout, but her voice was a torn whisper. Ranger lifted his head and howled, a wild, mournful sound that cut through the storm. The search party heard him. Lisa, running ahead of the sheriff and Sergeant Durham, skidded to a stop in the slush, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the German Shepherd, and behind him, Emily, bloodied, coughing, but alive. "Oh my God!" Lisa dropped to her knees beside Emily, pressing a blanket around her shoulders, arms trembling as she checked her pulse, her eyes shining with tears. "You're okay. You're okay. You're okay." Emily tried to speak, but Lisa only hugged her tighter. Ranger stayed alert, his body between the women and the burning warehouse, watching the world with the suspicion of someone who'd seen too much. Sheriff Briggs and Claire Durham arrived seconds later. Briggs barked orders, radioing for the paramedics, while Claire scanned the horizon, gun drawn, her gaze locking on a white van fishtailing out of the parking lot. She caught a glimpse of Ray at the wheel, wild-eyed, bleeding, desperate as he hit the gas. "There!" Claire shouted, already moving. "That's our guy! He's running!" Briggs gave the order. Claire took off into the storm, headlights swinging around as her squad car roared to life, the snow swallowing the road ahead. Lisa stayed with Emily, gently wrapping her wrists, murmuring words of comfort she barely remembered saying. Emily clung to her badge, ranger's fur, and the rough edge of consciousness. Sirens wailed, blue and red streaks bleeding into the night. The rescue team hustled to Emily's side, voices blurring with the adrenaline pounding in her ears. Someone pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Another wrapped a thermal blanket around her. Lisa squeezed her hand, refusing to let go. For a moment, Emily drifted, half present, half trapped in the memory of smoke and fire. In her mind, she saw her brother's face, her own reflection in Ranger's haunted eyes, the faces of everyone she'd ever failed. But Ranger nudged her again, his eyes insistent. He pressed his paw onto her lap, a silent command. Stay. Don't give up. I'm here. Emily blinked hard, focusing on the world around her. The warehouse burned, lighting up the snow like a second sunrise. She saw the rescue team fanning out, searching the debris for any sign of Ray's accomplices, for evidence, for anything that could explain why she'd been targeted. The town had always had secrets. Tonight the storm had dragged them into the open. Across the lot, Claire's headlights cut through the storm. She tailed Ray's van, radio crackling as she called in the pursuit. Suspect fleeing east on Highway 14. White van, driver injured. All units respond. Ray's van careened through the snow, sliding across the icy road. Claire followed, determined, her jaw set. She'd seen too many criminals slip away in this weather, but not tonight. Not after what they'd done to Emily. She gripped the wheel, every nerve tuned to the chase. Back at the warehouse, Emily tried to sit up, her head spinning. Lisa steadied her. Don't move. Paramedics are almost here. Emily shook her head, coughing. Ray, he's not working alone. He said there's more. A network. She forced herself to speak through the pain. Don't let them get away. Lisa met her eyes, fierce, determined. We won't. You just focus on breathing. Let us handle the rest. Ranger circled Emily, barking once, sharp and clear. He looked at Lisa, then back at the burning building, as if urging her to hurry. Within minutes, the rescue team had swept the grounds, finding traces of other footprints, odd markings, and evidence of hurried packing. Paramedics arrived, loading Emily onto a stretcher, wrapping her in blankets. She protested weakly, wanting to stay conscious, wanting to see Ranger's face, but Ranger refused to leave her side. When the paramedics tried to move him, he bared his teeth, not with violence but with a ferocious loyalty that brooked no argument. Finally, Lisa climbed into the ambulance and patted the floor beside Emily. Come on, hero, she needs you. Ranger leapt up, settling next to Emily, his head pressed to her chest. The paramedics exchanged a look, then shrugged. Tonight, rules could bend. As the ambulance doors closed, Emily caught one last glimpse of the burning warehouse, the snow swirling and the town waking up to sirens and the promise of reckoning. She squeezed Ranger's ear, whispering, You did it. We're alive. And through the haze of pain and sirens and bitter cold, Emily realized that, for the first time in years, she wasn't fighting alone. Somewhere on the dark highway, Claire's headlights pursued the fleeing van, refusing to let the darkness win. Snow still drifted in thick, silent waves across Red Hollow, but dawn clawed at the horizon, smearing gold behind skeletal pine and broken fence posts. The warehouse smoldered, a ruin of cinders and twisted beams, as first responders picked through the wreckage, searching for any sign of Ray Morton or his accomplices. But the real battle was shifting, moving from fire and snow into something deeper and colder. The hidden rot inside the town. Emily Parker lay in the hospital, battered but alive, Ranger curled protectively at her feet. Lisa never left her side, refusing even the smallest comfort until she'd seen the wounds cleaned, the IV in place, and the German Shepherd's limp checked twice. Outside, voices rose and fell in urgent conversations, the sheriff with the FBI, reporters crowding the entrance, townspeople buzzing with rumors that what happened to Emily might be only the beginning. By mid-morning, the investigation exploded open. Sergeant Claire Durham's car had trailed Ray's white van halfway to the old highway before losing sight of him in the trees. Deputies found tire tracks leading off-road, ending at a broken fence and a set of footprints veering into the forest. But they also found something more chilling, evidence that Ray had not been acting alone. Maps, burner phones, coded notebooks, and a list of names, most of them missing persons, some local, some from neighboring counties. Inside the hospital, Emily listened as Sheriff Briggs and an FBI agent named Keller explained what they'd uncovered. Lisa sat quietly, Ranger's head in her lap, absently scratching his ears as she tried to process the web stretching out from their small town. We traced calls from Ray's phone to several burner numbers, Keller said, flipping through files. They match patterns we've seen with regional trafficking rings, groups targeting isolated towns, exploiting folks who won't be missed right away. This is bigger than any of us thought. Emily's pulse quickened. Ray told me I was just the start, she whispered, fighting a wave of nausea. He was taking orders. Briggs nodded grimly. We need your help, Em. If you remember anything, any detail. She closed her eyes, trying to summon what Ray had said. They said I had to disappear you. Make an example. And the chill in his voice as he'd hinted at others in danger, her fists tightened. He mentioned a camp, something about old scouts. I think that's where they're hiding. Keller's eyes narrowed. He radioed the tip to his team. Minutes later, the FBI confirmed it. A white van matching Ray's was spotted near an abandoned Boy Scout camp 12 miles north, hidden in the pines and nearly snowed under. Ranger stirred. Lisa looked down at him, feeling his tension, ears pricked, muscles tight. He wants to go, she said softly. He knows something's not right. Emily swung her legs off the bed, ignoring the protests of pain and nurses alike. I'm coming too. Those kids, whoever's out there, they don't have time. No, Lisa argued, but Emily cut her off with a look. You saw what happened. We're not leaving anyone behind. The tactical team assembled fast. FBI agents, sheriff's deputies, and, at Emily's insistence, Lisa and Ranger. The German Shepherd was officially identified as the missing K-9, Jessica Grady's partner, a revelation that swept through the department like wildfire. Suddenly, Ranger was not just a stray, but a hero with a legacy, and his presence calmed the nerves of even the hardest agents. In a convoy of SUVs, they plowed north, Ranger riding shotgun, nose pressed to the window, eyes alert. As they neared the camp, Lisa whispered encouragement to the dog, sensing his anxiety. It's okay, Ranger. You're not alone now. None of us are. The vehicle slid to a stop at the tree line. The camp was a tangle of half-collapsed cabins and rusted swings choked by snow and silence. Ranger leapt out, paws sinking into drifts, nose to the ground. He moved with new certainty, weaving between cabins, barking sharp and low when he found a trail. The team fanned out, weapons drawn. Emily limped after him, flashlight sweeping the darkness. Where is it, boy? Show me. Ranger paused outside an old bunkhouse, ears back, growling at the door. Emily and two agents moved in. The lock was busted. The room rank with mold and the sour tang of fear. At the far end, two children huddled together, muddy, shivering, wrists tied. The world seemed to narrow to that moment. Emily's hands shook as she called to the kids, voice gentle, breaking through their terror. Lisa hurried in with blankets, murmuring comfort, as Ranger pressed his nose to their faces, his tail wagging slow, careful. One of the children clung to his neck, sobbing into his fur. The FBI agents swept the rest of the camp, arresting two more men hiding in the shadows. Sirens echoed through the woods as news spread. Children found alive, the ring broken, the dog who saved them already the talk of every radio and TV in the state. As the media swarmed, Emily and Lisa stood in the doorway, Ranger pressed between them, steady and proud. Snow still fell, gentle now. Red Hollow would never be the same, but in that ruined camp, with two lost souls wrapped in borrowed blankets and Ranger standing guard, it felt, for the first time in years, like hope. The rescue at the abandoned scout camp made headlines before Emily Parker even reached her hospital room. By the time the paramedics wheeled her inside, half the town was gathered outside in the snow. Neighbors who'd once ignored each other, now clutching mugs of coffee and trading rumors, waiting for news about the deputy and the kids. Television vans lined Main Street. Through the window, the lights of Red Hollow glowed warmer than Emily could ever remember. But inside her hospital room, the world was smaller, quiet, almost sacred. Emily lay still, battered body sinking into starched sheets. The bruises on her arms and face were already yellowing, and the cuts on her wrists burned whenever she moved. Yet none of that compared to the ache inside, a deep old wound cracked open by survival. Ranger slept at the foot of her bed, his head resting on crossed paws, every so often lifting his muzzle to nuzzle her toes, as if reminding her he was real. Nurses and detectives came and went. Sheriff Briggs visited with flowers, his gruff concern so awkward it made her smile. Sergeant Durham dropped off a bag of fresh clothes and a card from the department. "You're tougher than Winter, Parker. Don't you forget it." Emily taped it to the wall, needing the proof. Still at night, when the machines beeped and the hallway hushed, memories surged. The fire in the warehouse, the children's terror, her brother's face that last winter, lost and pleading for help she couldn't give. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw failures, not victories. One evening, as dusk pressed violet shadows against the glass, Lisa slipped quietly into the room. She looked tired, older than her years, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, hands jammed in the pockets of her parka. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Lisa exhaled and sat, her gaze drifting to Ranger. "Did I ever tell you," she began, voice thin, "that when I was a kid, my brother disappeared? I was 9, he was 7, vanished on his way home from school. We never found him." Emily listened, surprised, her own pain pausing for a beat. Lisa's eyes shimmered with old grief. "I thought if I just loved enough, searched enough, I could bring him back. But the world doesn't work like that. So I became a vet, started rescuing every animal I could. It helped sometimes, made the world feel less broken." She paused, watching Ranger shift in his sleep, one paw twitching as he dreamed. "The night you disappeared, I told myself I'd find you. I couldn't save my brother, but maybe I could save someone else. And then, that dog, he showed up with your badge and I let myself hope for the first time in years." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. "You did save me, Lisa. You and Ranger. I don't think I'd have made it without you." Lisa smiled, shaky but genuine. "Maybe we all saved each other." Outside, sirens blared, a distant echo now, proof the world went on. Inside, the room grew brighter, lighter. Emily reached for Lisa's hand, and they sat in silence, the pain between them shared, the grief made smaller by kindness. Days passed. Ranger transformed before everyone's eyes, no longer a stray, but a quiet hero. He walked the hospital halls with purpose, his limp fading, his eyes bright. Children came to visit, slipping him scraps of food and shy smiles. Nurses taped newspaper clippings to the walls. "Hero dog saves missing deputy, children in Montana snowstorm." People who'd never spoken before now nodded to each other in the elevator, sharing stories of loss, survival, and the stray who'd become a symbol for them all. Inspired by the rescue, Red Hollow's mayor announced the Second Chance Project, a program to train strays and abandoned dogs as service and search animals. Volunteers poured in. Emily watched from her window as the first group of dogs arrived at Lisa's clinic, tails wagging, eyes shining with the chance for a new start. She felt pride spark in her chest, a pride she'd thought she'd lost for good. One afternoon, Emily let herself remember her brother without guilt for the first time. She talked to him in the quiet, thanking him for the courage he'd left her, for the stubbornness that had kept her alive. She told him she forgave herself. She told herself it was time to live for both of them. Ranger pressed close to her side, his head heavy on her lap. She scratched behind his ears, voice steady. "You're not lost anymore, are you?" "Neither am I." Lisa joined them, her laugh soft and real. "Family's what you make it," she said. "Sometimes it looks like this, battered, patched together, but strong." Emily, Lisa, and Ranger spent those days forming something new, something like a family. They walked together through the snowy streets, Lisa talking about her plans for the project, Emily promising to help train new dogs once she was healed. They built routines, morning coffee, sunset walks, the comfort of presence after so much time alone. Red Hollow noticed. Neighbors brought casseroles. Strangers sent letters. A town that once looked away from its wounded now reached out, changed by the story of the dog who refused to give up and the deputy who learned to trust again. Their pain didn't vanish. The scars remained. But woven together, they formed a new kind of strength, a reminder that even the broken can become brave, and even the lost can come home. Snow fell soft as memory, blanketing Red Hollow in a hush that felt almost holy. The town square, usually just a quiet patch between the diner and the post office, had transformed overnight into a festival of light. Lanterns hung from old spruce branches, kids built towers of snow, and nearly every soul in town gathered beneath a makeshift banner that read, "Second Chance Project Celebration." Even strangers who'd never spoken before crowded together, eager to witness the miracle that had unfolded in their midst. Emily Parker stood on the steps of the courthouse, Ranger pressed close to her side, Lisa on her left. For the first time since her brother's death, Emily felt whole, scarred maybe, but finally unbroken. She wore her uniform, freshly cleaned, and her new badge caught the winter sunlight, a glimmer of hope for anyone who happened to look her way. The mayor stepped to the microphone, cheeks flushed, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Today we honor not only our heroes, but our second chances," she said, voice carrying across the crowd. "Let's remember, sometimes those the world overlooks, the broken, the lost, the stray, become the ones who save us all." Ranger stood tall, fur glossy, scar still visible on his hind leg, a badge of survival, not shame. In the hush that followed, the mayor reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver badge engraved with a single word: Hero. She knelt, pinning it to Ranger's collar as children gasped and old-timers wiped their eyes. The dog sat perfectly still, accepting the honor as if he'd always known he was meant for more than just survival. News cameras flashed. The story of Ranger, the miracle dog, had already traveled far beyond Montana. Reporters huddled in the snow, beaming the ceremony live to anyone who needed a reminder that redemption was possible, even in a winter as hard as this one. Emily stepped forward. She took the microphone, feeling a tremor in her hands, but Ranger nudged her, steadying her, grounding her in the present. "I spent a long time believing I didn't deserve a second chance," she began, scanning the crowd, her voice strong. "I lost my way. I lost my brother. I almost lost myself in the dark. But I found hope again, in a place I never expected, in a stray dog who refused to quit, in a friend who didn't give up, in a town that learned to care for its own." She paused, letting the emotions settle, watching faces soften and jaws unclench. "We don't get to choose the storms that find us. We only choose who we become after." And the truth is, sometimes it's the invisible ones, the lost, the forgotten, the broken, who become heroes. Sometimes all it takes is a little faith and a lot of stubbornness to save a life, or to save your own. The crowd burst into applause, hats raised, mittens waving. Lisa grinned, tears streaking her cheeks as Ranger barked, once clear and proud, as if he understood every word. The Second Chance Project was launched that day. The first class of rescued strays, most of them battered, overlooked, and like Ranger survivors, paraded across the stage, led by volunteers and future handlers. Lisa handed out certificates. Emily shook hands, each exchange a promise that the story wouldn't end here. Red Hollow would become a place where lost souls, human and canine, found purpose again. Sheriff Briggs offered the final blessing, voice rough but full of pride. "This badge," he said, holding up Ranger's silver medallion, "reminds us that courage doesn't always bark the loudest or walk on two legs. Sometimes it's the quiet loyalty of a friend. Sometimes it's just refusing to leave someone behind." As the ceremony closed, townsfolk lingered, sharing stories, hugging old enemies, forging new friendships. Emily, Lisa, and Ranger drifted to the edge of the square, letting the moment soak in. Emily squeezed Lisa's hand, whispering, "We did it. All of us." Lisa smiled, her eyes on the sky. "And look at him," she said softly, as Ranger sat tall, surveying his new kingdom. "Not just a stray anymore. He's the sentinel of Red Hollow." In the weeks that followed, word of their story rippled far and wide. Donations flooded in, more dogs were saved, children found new hope. The town's old wounds began to heal, not because pain vanished, but because it was finally shared, transformed by courage and connection. And yet, the greatest transformation belonged to Emily. No longer did she dream only of what she'd lost. Now, she saw what she'd built. A new family, a legacy of compassion, and the understanding that vulnerability was not weakness, but the source of all true strength. As dusk settled, Emily, Lisa, and Ranger walked home together beneath a sky powdered with new snow. On the porch of their little house, Ranger curled up at their feet, nose twitching as he watched the flakes fall. Inside, laughter glowed through the windows, the sound of hope remaking a home. And so, in Red Hollow, the lesson lived on. No matter how lost, broken, or invisible someone may feel, with patience, faith, and the willingness to trust again, anyone can find their place in the world. And sometimes, become the hero they'd always needed. The end.